I'm going to solder this setting on the inside of this jump ring. Now before I do that, I'm going to file the wire to half its thickness. And the reason I'm doing that now is that once that's soldered onto there, I can't do anything to it. Well, other than set the stone. So I'm just going to brace this against my bench peg and file on the outside to half the thickness. Do all four, and with this filed flat, it'll be easier to solder it to this. So I've got all of the outside wires filed to half the thickness. Now on two of the bits on the bottom, I'm filing them so that they will match the curve of the wire I'm soldering it against. So as usual, you need a good flat surface to solder to. So I'm making this flat, and I'm going to file a little flat on the inside of this so we have a really good solder joint. So you can see I'm soldering this from the bottom, and a little bit of flux, and I'm going to use hard solder at each point where it touches. Neutral flame. If you're using an LPG torch for this, I would suggest that you use easy solder, because otherwise all of the joints are probably going to melt at the same time and everything will fall apart. With the mini torch, you should be able to direct your heat so the solder does what you want it to do. Yep, just like that. Now we'll quench this and pickle it. Take your setting out of the pickle, have a really good look at it, make sure that the solder is well done. Place the stone in. Make sure it's level. And now that we have something to hold it with, we're going to file right down until we touch the stone. This is our number 2 cut flat hand file. So go right down till you touch the stone. The stone is actually harder than the file. Yeah. Now that will give us a rough height. And what you could do is you could set the stone at this point. You could cut into the side of the claws so that the stone has a little notch to go into. But because this is the perfect size, I'm just going to push the claws over. Okay, we've got our pretty little setting out of the pickle. The soldering looks good. So now I'm going to take a stone setting burr, which is the one with the taper to match the culet of the stone. And we don't need to go in deep with this, but we need to go in just so the stone has a nice place to sit. A little bit of wax. You can just hold this in your fingers. Make sure that it's straight both ways. and you should see a nice flat seat on the bottom. So now we're going to test fit the stone, and we'll just drop it in with a set of tweezers, and we want to make sure that it's nice and level. Now, when you have it nice and level, what I do is I hold a fingernail or a thumbnail on it to make sure it stays that way. Then I'm going to take my saw, rest it just on the girdle, and slide it back and forth just a little to make a mark. And the mark is so that we can go in with a triangular file or with a heart burr and make a seat for our stone. So always making sure it's level, because they do have a tendency to shift or to move. Yep. So now we have all of our marks, and that mark will be just above the girdle. And that's fine, because all that does is give us a place to file. Now, a heart burr, if you don't know what it looks like, I'll show you. So it looks like this. It's basically just a sharp little wheel. And what you would do is you would put that in your handpiece and just spin it up and just put a cut, a small cut, just below that mark you've put on there, and that will be a spot where the girdle will click into. Or you can use one of your little triangular jeweler's files, but it's a bit awkward to get it in there. I would use this if I were you. I don't know if you can see the little saw mark in there, but what I'm going to do now is put a little bit of wax on my heart burr. I'll see if I can get this in so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to brace both of these in my hands, and I'm just going to put a mark where my saw cut was. So do all four. These cuts don't have to be very deep, but they do have to be deep enough that when you start pushing the claws over on your stone, that it won't ride up. If the inside of your claws are just smooth, oftentimes when you push one claw, it'll want to push the stone up the other side. So I can see these marks just above the girdle, and that looks good to me. Now, what you can do is you can just push these over. You can either squeeze them with a set of pliers, you can push them over with a bezel pusher. If you're lucky enough to have one of these claw setters, you can use it, and you can tell by the taper that it's going to push all four claws at the same time. So I'm just going to, well, zoom in so you can see. I'm just going to put this on, gently push, and you can see that that started to close the claws over. Yeah. So a little more. Now the stone is held at this point, and you can, yeah. So you can either use your bezel rocker or a burnisher, pretty much anything to push these over. I'll show you with the bezel rocker. So you just hold, and oftentimes you want to hold against the other side so it doesn't push the setting over. We're just going to push that little claw right down on top of the stone. Now that's all held, and what I would do at this point is I would use my little jeweler's file to shape the end of these claws the way I want. And once you have the shape you want, then just use a burnisher to smooth the claws over. I'll back out and show you. So I'm just bracing the setting against my thumb, and I'm basically pulling against myself. So I'm just rubbing the burnisher right on the tips of the claws. That'll make them shiny, and it will harden them. So do all four. Now, this stone is tough, so you can just chuck this in a tumbler if you want. You could also polish it with your Tripoli wheel. Now I'm going to make a bail for this, but that's basically what we're making. And I've set this on a little pendant, but it can be a ring, it can be a feature on a brooch, it can be anything. It's a nice little setting. Done.